Hi everyone, it's Katrina. Being struck by lightning is something that happens much more often than many people realize. Today, I'm going to take you through some of the most shocking stories of people who were struck by lightning. Sometimes, people even get a new power, gaining superpowers. In November 2015, Christopher Green had just taken his young daughter to a medical center in Queensland, Australia because she'd been stung by a wasp. But what Christopher didn't know at the time was that he'd be the one admitted to the hospital and that he'd leave with a new sixth sense. Christopher saw the storm coming but didn't think much of it. The hospital visit had gone fine, his daughter was okay, and it was time to go home. His wife was getting their daughter into the backseat of the car as Christopher stood outside and held an umbrella over them. Although the umbrella had a wooden handle, Christopher's right index finger was just touching the metal pole in the center, and that was all it took for a lightning bolt to hit the umbrella, travel through the pole, and enter Christopher's body. This could happen to anybody. Christopher doesn't remember exactly what happened. He felt something like a blinding light and then blacked out. His wife would later tell him that he simply collapsed. Luckily, though, they were already at the hospital. It was a stroke of serious bad luck to be struck by lightning, but it couldn't have happened at a better place. His wife ran into the center and got the staff to help. When Christopher woke up, he was hooked up to a monitor and his heart was racing out of control. Christopher survived, but the effects of that electric shock have stayed with him. After the strike, Christopher's right arm would tingle whenever a storm was coming. It was like being able to feel a rainstorm deep in your bones. Only Christopher could physically sense an electric storm coming because of his arm. The same arm that was struck by lightning tingled and hurt. It's showdown time! I want to give a big thank you to Amberly and Thee, as well as Mr. CG and his family for supporting this channel. Bye guys! Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing discoveries or dinosaurs or extraordinary survival stories. We have it all. John and Ashley Mberg. The chances of being struck by lightning are slim, so the chances of the whole family getting struck by lightning at the same time are nearly zero. Ashley and John Mberg might be the only father-daughter pair in history to be struck by lightning at the exact same time. The bizarre incident happened in 2022 at a Major League Baseball game in Tampa Bay, Florida. The New York Yankees were playing against the Atlanta Braves. It was the middle of the sixth inning, and thunderstorms were creeping into the area. The game was canceled, which they only do if a severe thunderstorm is approaching. Lightning was getting close to the field as the sky turned violently gray. Ashley and John fled the stadium and tried to find their car, but they got lost in the parking lot as the storm closed in on them. Seeking shelter, they hunkered under a tree thinking they'd be safe. But they weren't. John pulled out his key to try and set off the car alarm, and then a flash blinded them both. Ashley was bent over adjusting her shoe, while John had the keys in one hand. Then they were both flying through the air. John was knocked unconscious by the force of the lightning strike. When he woke up, he was paralyzed with his face in the mud. He also had a broken cheekbone that was radiating pain through his whole head. A few feet away was his daughter lying on the ground. She had a nasty burn to her neck because the necklace she was wearing got heated by the lightning. But miraculously, they both survived. However, they spent 2 days in the hospital before they were released. It was a brutal experience, but not for nothing. The Yankees offered them a free autographed baseball from Aaron Judge and free tickets to one of the Yankees' regular season games. It's not a season pass, but it's better than nothing, right? Playing video games gone wrong. Just when you think you're safe, a lightning bolt comes out of your PlayStation and electrocutes you while in the middle of playing video games. That was sort of what happened to Aidan Rowan in the UK in 2022. It was 10:30 p.m. on a Monday night, and Aidan was having a fun time playing PlayStation in his living room. But suddenly he heard a crack, then felt a hot, jolting sensation throughout his entire body. The lightning bolt didn't come out of his PlayStation. It came in through his window. Aidan was playing during a thunderstorm and left his window open, and a stray bit of lightning came in and tickled him. It didn't really feel like a tickle, but it wasn't nearly as bad as it could have been. Aidan's partner was able to get him to the emergency room, and there, the hospital confirmed he was struck by lightning. He was totally fine though, and was only left with a headache and some burn stripes on his arm. Do you think you're going to be playing video games in a thunderstorm anytime soon? Maybe don't leave your window open during a storm. The truth is that in most cases, this sort of thing wouldn't happen. Doctors told told Aiden they thought the lightning likely bounced off the water and through the window because the ground was too hard from the recent heat wave in the UK. Surviving the impossible. You've seen a father-daughter duo be struck by lightning at the same time, so now it's time for the father-son duo who got struck by lightning at the same time. This also happened in Florida on Jupiter Island, but unlike the case of Ashley and John Mberg, this tale has a far more frightening ending. It was a Sunday afternoon in June 2021. Matthew Anderson and his 64-year-old father, Mark Johnson, had just finished a peaceful day of fishing when a thunderstorm appeared on the horizon. Matthew and Mark walked alongside the water in the direction of the parking lot because the sand was so hot they didn't want to burn their bare feet. Then, before they knew what was happening, lightning was coming down around them as if they'd gotten stuck in an electrical storm. Matthew doesn't remember exactly what happened, and he doesn't know how long he was unconscious. Maybe it was a few seconds, or it could have been a few minutes. When he woke up and got to his feet, he fell back down again. Matthew's knees were wobbly as if he'd just been knocked out by a heavyweight boxer. And sadly, in his blurred vision, Matthew saw his father dead on the ground. Neither of them had seen the lightning coming. One second, Matthew was walking along the beach, and the next moment he was blinking into awareness. It's believed that Mark took the direct strike from the lightning bolt, which then jumped to Matthew because they were so close. Unfortunately, though, the enormous surge of electricity stopped Mark Johnson's heart. What followed were several minutes of intense resuscitation. Luckily, a lifeguard was around to give Mark CPR. 2 of his ribs were broken from the chest compressions. There was a triage station nearby, plus a bystander helped before the Martin County Fire Rescue arrived. They tried to use an automated external defibrillator to bring Mark back to life, but the machine couldn't detect a heartbeat, and that's when Mark was officially declared dead. But his death wouldn't last forever. Matthew was flown by helicopter to St. Mary's Medical Center while his father was taken in an ambulance to Jupiter Medical Center. Mark was taken in an ambulance because he was, well, dead. But then on the way to the hospital, he miraculously came back to life. It was a medical miracle the doctors honestly couldn't explain. He was alive in the ambulance, but even then the paramedics assumed he was going to die at any second. His wife arrived and doctors gave her a chance to say goodbye, but he simply refused to die. He made a full recovery, though his life was forever changed. Mark now has trouble with short-term memory, and he's lost all the feelings on the bottom of his feet. But at least he's alive. Lightning in bed. Imagine for a moment that you're lying in your bed. Maybe you are right now. Suddenly, you hear a crack and then a bang. A flash of lightning illuminates your window and instantly you feel heat. This was what Corey Wilmer experienced in 2018. Unfortunately for Corey, he was struck by lightning while lying in his own bed. Corey was just 15 years old when the lightning bolt struck the roof of his home in rural Minnesota. He immediately felt the heat of the electricity as the current flowed through his entire body. In fact, the heat was so intense that Corey's bed burst into flames. Don't worry though, Corey survived. In an interview with local news, Corey said it still dawns on him every now and again that he got struck by lightning. In Corey's own words, he said it felt like an odd burning sensation. Corey said the lightning lifted him off the surface of the bed while the sheets and mattress erupted into flames. But how can this happen, and is it going to happen to you? The odds are extremely slim. In the case of young Corey, the lightning bolt hit the roof and charged through the wall, touched his bed, and then finally reached Corey. The lightning bolt didn't magically crash through the roof and strike Corey. It traveled through his house, up the legs of his bed, and into his body. In truth, this kind of thing doesn't happen often enough for anybody to be worried. If you were struck by lightning, what ability would you like to wake up with? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, be sure to subscribe. The sole survivor. Amber Escudero Contos Tathes was the only survivor of a deadly lightning strike that took place in August 22 outside the White House. She and 3 others were hiding underneath a tree in Lafayette Park, but Amber was the only one to walk away with her life. Amber and the other 3 victims didn't have to contend with just one bolt of lightning. They were assaulted by a barrage of lightning bolts as if Zeus himself was hurling them from the clouds. Within half a second, Amber and the others were hit by by 6 bolts of lightning. James Mueller, Donna Mueller, and Brooks Lambert were killed by the half-dozen lightning bolts, but Amber was left with heavy nerve damage from her waist to her feet. She has no feeling in her legs and can't get around without a walker. The best way she's been able to describe it is as pins and needles all through her legs that prevent her from moving them. Sometimes she says it feels like her feet are on fire or that they're freezing cold. Her nerves just don't understand how to process feeling anymore in her legs. But still, Amber is alive. Doctors at the emergency room said they'd never seen a patient survive so many lightning strikes. The other 3 certainly didn't, but Amber managed to come out relatively unscathed. She died twice, but the nurses resuscitated her both times. In both instances, she lost oxygen to her brain and had no heartbeat. Amber may have survived because of her Doc Marten shoes. Doctors think it was the thick rubber soles that reduced the shock she absorbed, allowing her to live. That might be something to think about if you live in a lightning-prone area. Maybe pick up some thicker-soled shoes just in case. Left with wings. If you don't believe in guardian angels, this next story might change your mind. A man in North Carolina was struck by lightning in 2015. He narrowly survived the experience and was left with scars that look exactly like a pair of angel wings. During the summer months of that year, Chad Hollingsworth of Sophia was spraying his house on a Saturday afternoon. A lightning storm came out of nowhere, and one of the bolts struck him on his right arm. Luckily, though, a friend was there to take him to the hospital. He survived the incident with minor injuries to his arm and back. The hospital released Chad early the next evening, so he was admitted for no more than a day. It was after Chad got home that he realized the lightning bolt left him with scars that look like angel wings. His family believes it's a sign from heaven, a sign to let Chad know that his guardian angel was looking out for him that day. Tragedy in Texas. In Central Texas, a single lightning strike caused an unimaginable tragedy. Grayson Boggs and his father Matthew Boggs were in their driveway in June 2022 when they were suddenly struck by lightning. Grayson, who was only 6 years old, was holding his father's hand when the strike took both their lives. When officers from Bosque County arrived at the scene, both father and son were unresponsive. Matthew died from his injuries on the spot, but Grayson was still breathing, so he was transported to the local hospital where he was put on a ventilator. Doctors did everything they could to keep the boy alive, but several weeks after his father died in their driveway, Grayson was removed from the ventilator. There was just nothing more they could do for him. It was horrific for the rest of the family who had clung to hope for weeks, only to have that hope ripped away from them. Matthew had been walking Grayson home from the bus stop when the lightning struck them. Nobody could have possibly anticipated a simple escort home from school would end both their lives so prematurely. The deadly golf course. In the Canadian capital of Ottawa, a round of golf turned deadly. 2 men in the middle of their golf game were struck by rogue lightning bolts on the green. The tragedy struck at the Loch March Golf and Country Club in Kanata. On June 26, 2023, Justin Newsom and Jesse Hawkins were caught in a thunderstorm. There had been severe weather warnings, but the pair went golfing anyway. For most people, being struck by lightning seems so impossible that they just don't take the proper precautions. Sure, it's raining, but there's golfing to be done. Nobody thinks they're going to be the one to get hit by lightning and die. Justin and Jesse were only in their mid-30s. They both had very successful careers and hadn't even reached the peak of their lives yet. Unfortunately, though, it was all over before it even began, just because of some lightning. According to Environment Canada, lightning only kills about 2 people in the country every year. It's an incredibly rare thing to happen in Canada. The Environmental Agency also gave some warnings after the incident to educate the public. They said if thunder is audible, it means lightning can reach you. If you can hear thunder, the lightning can see you. Thunder means get indoors immediately. And if you happen to be on the golf course, throw your golf clubs away and get to safety. It's just not worth the risk. Thanks for watching. Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed.
The gift of sight. Franco Magnani was born in 1934 in the Tuscan hillside town of Pontito, Italy. After spending part of his childhood there, his family moved. Magnani immigrated to San Francisco during the 1960s and alternated between jobs as a cook and a woodworker. At some point, he came down with a severe fever, which was accompanied by seizures and delirium. Thankfully, Magnani healed from his mysterious illness But he began experiencing something even more bizarre, extremely lucid, vibrant dreams about his hometown of Pontito, a place he hadn't been to in over 30 years. Then, despite never having picked up a paintbrush in his life, Magnani felt the overwhelming urge to paint the images from his dreams. He beautifully recreated his visions purely from memory, without referencing any photographs. Photos that were taken after he made the paintings demonstrate an uncanny resemblance between the man's artwork and his real-life childhood village. The seizures Magnani experienced during his fever seemed to unlock some hidden part of his memory, along with a previously undiscovered artistic talent. It also changed him in other ways, making him a very enthusiastic and obsessive painter. When an image popped into his mind, he had to drop everything and start painting immediately. Medical tests determined that Magnani had suffered from temporal lobe epilepsy, which is known to occasionally cause obsessive tendencies. But the man's sudden passion for painting and detailed memories of boyhood lack a concrete medical or even logical explanation. The Sudden Savant. As impossible as it sounds, Jason Paget literally became a genius overnight. He didn't enjoy learning. He thought math was stupid and had to repeat his senior year of high school in order to graduate. For over a decade after that, his hobbies primarily consisted of chasing girls, working out, styling his mullet, and partying with his friends. One night in 2002, a group of men brutally assaulted Paget as he left a bar. During the attack, they kicked him in the head numerous times. Paget's friend rushed him to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed him with a concussion, injected him with pain medication, and released him. The next morning, he awoke with choppy vision, which he later described in a TED Talk as a bizarre series of stop-action frames. In his words, like individual discrete picture frames with a line connecting them. He would see light hitting things like cars and leaving objects like triangles floating in the air. This sense continued to grow and nearly drove Jason Paget insane, so much so that he had multiple medical tests done to him and even had metal plates put into his head. Paget wondered if he was crazy. For 3 years, he pretty much kept to himself and even avoided going outside, trying to fight what he saw. It was just too much for him, so he started to draw to get the images out of his head. This was how his superpower was discovered, so to speak. He wasn't just drawing random shapes, he was drawing fractals. Fractals are complex mathematical curves or geometric figures that are useful for modeling structures, especially those found in nature. It's more complicated, of course, but I'm trying to simplify it as best I can. To see them is enough of a superpower, but Jason Paget was able to draw them with perfect clarity and precision. He eventually went back to college at the urging of a physicist who noticed something special about his creations. While there, Paget realized that through his injury, he had acquired a genius-level understanding of math. He underwent advanced testing on his brain and was diagnosed with acquired savant syndrome, which means that at some point he became capable of using parts of his brain that most humans cannot consciously access. While Paget admittedly suffered from some negative side effects of his brain injury, such as memory problems and obsessive-compulsive disorder, he also feels that he gained an incredible gift that enables him to fully see the world's beauty. If you want to learn more, he wrote a book called Struck by Genius, talking about his attack and how it changed him. And now for number 7. But first, big shout out to Casey Judd. Thanks for the nice comment. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and let me know what superpower you wish you had in the comments below. Foreign accent syndrome. It's fun to impersonate accents, but let's face it, most of us aren't very good at it. On the other hand, some people acquire new, seemingly authentic accents without even trying. Michelle Myers is one of just 100 people who have been diagnosed with an extremely rare condition called foreign accent syndrome since 1907. The former Texas beauty queen, who now lives in Arizona, has never left the US, but sounds genuinely British when she speaks. Houston native Lisa Alamia is as Texan as it gets, yet suffers from the same speech affliction. Her children have become used to people questioning how their mom got her distinctively British accent, and in both her and Myers' case, the explanation is anything but simple. People who suffer from foreign accent syndrome start speaking with a bizarre accent seemingly out of nowhere, usually after incurring brain damage from a head injury, stroke, or medical procedure. In Michelle Myers' case, she went to sleep with unbearably painful headaches and awoke with various accents, including British, Australian, and Irish. Alamia's British accent set in after she underwent a medical procedure to correct an underbite. Speaking flawlessly with a new accent may seem like a superpower and is indeed impressive in its own right, but foreign accent syndrome tends to have alienating effects on its sufferers, who are often accused of faking their condition and avoid socializing due to skeptics. I mean, if you had a friend who started speaking with a different accent, what would you do? Let me know in the comments below. Alamia has learned to embrace her newfound speech pattern and to even approach it humorously. While she hopes to regain her former drawl, she's rolling with the punches and enjoying her wildly out-of-place accent for what it is. Meanwhile, neurologists have yet to understand what causes foreign accent syndrome. Magically musical. DC Comics, the character known as Barry Allen was struck by lightning that transformed him into the fastest man alive. But for Tony Secoria, he had a slightly different reaction when he got hit from out of the blue. One gloomy afternoon in 1994, Tony Secoria was making a call on an outdoor payphone. Right after he hung up, Tony was struck by lightning. The then 42-year-old orthopedic surgeon from upstate New York later described the terrifying moment in an interview with neurologist Oliver Sacks, stating, "I remember a flash of light coming out of the phone. It hit me in the face. Next thing I remember, I was flying backwards." Secoria's consciousness separated from his body. He hovered over the scene watching a woman attempt CPR on him. He said, "I was surrounded by a bluish-white light, an enormous feeling of well-being and peace. The highest and lowest points of my life raced by me. I had the perception of accelerating or being drawn up. There was speed and direction. Then, as I was saying to myself, this is the most glorious feeling I have ever had. Slam! I was back." His newfound bliss ended when the man felt intense physical pain and was suddenly back inside his body. The CPR had brought him back to life. Medical exams turned up nothing unusual, and Secoria returned to work a few weeks later. His symptoms, including sluggishness and memory problems, resolved on their own. He was lucky to be alive and not have any brain damage. A few months later, he felt overwhelmingly compelled to play the piano, despite being a rock and roll fan and having no previous interest in playing an instrument, aside from a few boyhood lessons decades earlier. Secoria quickly discovered that conventional methods of learning to play an instrument were essentially useless in his case, yet he still played beautifully. He composed songs based on music he heard in his mind and dreams, along with sudden, seemingly random bursts of inspiration. The first song he wrote was appropriately titled Lightning Sonata. Besides becoming a master musician, Secoria also became uncharacteristically spiritual. And while medical tests failed to explain these profound changes, they undoubtedly result from that fateful day in 1994 when he was struck by lightning. The calendrical calculator. Orlando Sorrell was a typical 10-year-old boy who enjoyed sports. That all changed during a baseball game on August 19, 1979, when the ball slammed into the left side of Sorrell's head with such force he fell to the ground. He got back up shortly after and continued playing baseball. Because Sorrell didn't tell his parents about his injury, he received no medical treatment for it. Meanwhile, he suffered from a lengthy headache. The headache eventually subsided, and soon after, Sorrell developed a fascinating ability to do calendrical calculations. Put simply, he can perform complex equations involving calendar dates in his head, and with ease. Additionally, he typically remembers specific details about dates and moments of his life, including what the weather was like, what he was doing, and where he was. In 2002, NBC Dateline invited Sorrell to undergo functional MRI testing at Columbia University. Experts compared his test results to those typical of non-savants and non-geniuses, like the rest of us, and diagnosed him with acquired savant syndrome. It's the same condition as several other people that I'm telling you about, which, as you can see, manifests in various ways, in different talents and types of ingenuity. What's most remarkable about acquired savant syndrome is that it's defined as ordinary people who suddenly gain extraordinary intellectual and/or artistic abilities, suggesting that somewhere deep inside the human mind, there is a key to unlocking hidden genius. A talent unleashing lobotomy. Massachusetts resident and chiropractor John Sarkin experienced a multitude of health issues during his mid-30s, starting in 1989, including an internal ringing of the ears called tinnitus, which was caused by an overgrown blood vessel pushing against his acoustic nerve. He then also had a severe stroke, which is very strange for someone in their 30s. Surgeons performed various procedures in their attempts to treat Sarkin's ailments, including a lobotomy, which involves removing a portion or portions of the brain. Afterward, they explained to him that it was up to his remaining neurons to make sense of the world around him by developing new connections and finding new meaning. Easy for them to say. Sarkin's life as he knew it was over. In fact, in some ways, he felt like an entirely different person. "I have experienced stuff that has jettisoned me into a different relationship with reality," he explained in an interview with the ABC docuseries Medical Mysteries. He experienced creative compulsions that led him to obsessively draw pictures, which eventually filled up an entire storage room in his house. His best artwork, eventually sold for up to $20,000 apiece, was published in The New Yorker and was even displayed in prominent galleries. Sarkin once relied on disability to make ends meet, but these days his pieces typically sell for $10,000 and up. He was diagnosed with a condition called sudden artistic output, which, as I'm sure you've gathered by now, is what it sounds like. His work is inspired largely by pop culture, literature, and music. From fighter to fantasizer. A British man named Tommy McHugh spent most of his life engaging in petty crime, being arrested, and working as a builder in Liverpool. In 2001, at age 51, and after emerging from countless scraps unscathed, McHugh had a stroke on the toilet as a result of forcefully trying to relieve himself. Yikes, that is not how you want to go. Make sure you're getting enough fiber, people. He reported to the hospital with a major headache and learned that he suffered from ruptured aneurysms, which severed an artery and caused bleeding in and around his brain. After the stroke, McHugh no longer felt like himself. He experienced an identity crisis, and for 3 months he spoke in rhymes, not because he wanted to, but because he had no control over it. McHugh also felt an insatiable desire to write poetry and create artwork, and began devoting up to 19 hours a day to his new passions. In an attempt to understand these changes, he consulted neurologist Alice Flaherty of Harvard Medical School and Mark Lithgow of University College London. Flaherty determined that the hemorrhage heavily affected McHugh's brain and caused him to become very sensitive, emotional, and considerate of others' feelings. Lithgow concluded that McHugh had a normal IQ, but struggled with problems related to the brain's frontal lobes, such as talking too much and alternating efficiently between cognitive tasks. Typically, the brain's frontal lobes filter out most of the raw sensory data that the human mind picks up on, eliminating such material from any role in our conscious awareness. In McHugh's case, this inhibition was blocked, and his brain became a non-stop stream of creativity, which coincides with the man's explanation that his artwork captured a mere snippet of what went on in his mind. McHugh devoted the rest of his life to encouraging others to tap into their own creativity and promoting a philosophy of positivity. Seeing beyond blindness. Ben Underwood was just a toddler when doctors diagnosed him with retinal cancer in both eyes. The following year, his eyes were removed. His mother, Aquanetta, refused to give up on him, and Ben refused to give up on himself. He spent his childhood acquiring a skill that virtually no humans gain throughout their entire lifetime: echolocation. I had no idea this was even possible for humans. Human echolocation is where you create a sound that helps you to detect objects in your environment. By making clicking sounds with his tongue, Ben trained himself to detect the locations of objects and to thoroughly understand the dynamics of his surroundings. In other words, to see with his mind, just like a dolphin or a bat. Ben first discovered his amazing abilities at age 7. "I was at camp and I started clicking my tongue," he explained in an Oprah interview. "It became a navigational tool." He learned to run, ride a bike, rollerblade, play basketball and football, and skateboard. Sadly, in 2009, at the age of 16, the same cancer that claimed Ben's eyes took his life. He left behind a legacy of perseverance and resilience, reminding us of the human ability to overcome even in the face of seemingly undefeatable setbacks. A stroke of luck. In 1986, a forklift pinned Ken Walters against a wall and broke his back. The then 30-year-old engineer was bedridden for a year and suffered from excruciating pain. To make matters worse, he lost his housing benefit. Walters plunged into emotional and financial ruin, and his health problems worsened. Not much had improved when 19 years later, in 2005, Walters had a stroke. In the immediate aftermath, he could only communicate through writing. During his hospital stay, Walters began doodling on the paper he used for writing messages to nurses. It felt natural, and he couldn't stop himself anyway. Doctors believed this urge would subside, but when Walters returned home, his passion for imagery grew and transitioned from the pen and pad to his computer. He explained in a 2008 self-written article for The Guardian that he'd never had an interest in art, yet suddenly memories and thoughts appeared to me as abstract images. After nearly 2 decades of misfortune, Walters became a successful artist, and the stroke he'd initially felt doomed by gave him a long-awaited and well-deserved second chance at happiness. Thanks for watching. What superpower do you wish you could have? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear. And be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell if you haven't already. See you soon. Bye!